Hi, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on how to run a remote sales team. My name is Henny Raini and I'm a marketing manager at HubSpot at our Dublin office. However, I'm currently at my home office as well as all of our speakers and probably also many of you. I hope you're all feeling healthy, have a nice cup of coffee or tea in front of you, and are ready to hear some great keynotes. But before I introduce our agenda, I wanted to touch on an insight that HubSpot discovered. This data is from accurate benchmark data of our user base of over 70,000 customers. Over here, you can see that the deals created and the deals closed during the last couple of months have really gone down after the COVID measures really started to take place globally. But on the positive note, what we're also seeing is that the deal creation as well as other sales metrics are starting to pick up. However, we're still likely to be in this uncertain situation for a while, and most teams will stay remote for quite a bit. But if you're interested in getting more sales and marketing insights, I would encourage you to go to hubspot.com/COVID data. There's some really interesting stuff up there. But to really help you get through this uncertain situation right now, we have two great speakers. Our first speaker is Brian Bresee, a sales director for HubSpot. He has been a remote sales manager for over 2 years and really knows what he's talking about regarding remote work and sales. Our second speaker is Andrei Sochala, a sales director from Aircall. He was actually one of the first 10 employees at Aircall and has seen the immense growth that Aircall has gone through in the past couple of years to hundreds of employees. We're going to start with Brian, who is going to go over on how you can make sure that your sales team is set up for success working remotely. And then Andrei is going to continue on how you can also make sure that the team also hits target. But without further ado, I will let you get started, Brian.
All right, so I'll be speaking about setting up your sales team for success. So what are some of the fundamental things that you can do as a salesperson that you can do for your sales teams as a sales leader to help them be set up in this sort of remote world that we're all working in to really perform at their best. So at HubSpot, remote workers make up our third largest office. So if it were a single office, it would be the third largest globally. In the North America Partner Sales Team, we have about 40% of our 87 team members working remotely today. Personally, I've managed partially or fully remote teams for over 3 years at HubSpot. I was fortunate enough to lead, we had a remote initiative for HubSpot sales team in 2019 that I managed to roll out of globally, which included a bunch of playbooks and resources. And I was also featured on the Culture Happens HubSpot podcast about how to enable remote work. So it's something we think about a lot. We've done from either folks moving remote, which is sort of how it started at HubSpot, and then with hiring fully remote reps, onboarding, training, and helping them to be successful in a remote environment. So I'll talk about 4 sort of key challenges and how you can address them as a remote leader. How you structure your day, you can set up for remote to be successful. We'll talk about performance management. One of the key questions I hear from sales leaders that are managing a remote sales team is, how do I know if my team's productive? How do I know that they're actually working and that output is good? And what should I be looking at? From a culture perspective, we'll dig into how you can build an inclusive culture and help your team to stay really connected. And then lastly, building for collaboration. It's something that can be challenging with an office sales teams. So when you move remote, it's something that you have to build for sort of intentionally, and I'll speak to that as well. So a couple of stats. A lot of managers, a lot of business owners, a lot of leaders are sort of worried about people moving remote. I'm here to share with you that remote can be a really good thing. There was a 2-year Stanford study that was out of a Shanghai telecommunications firm. It's about 50% decrease in attrition. And they basically moved this cohort of workers remote. They tested to see over time what happened. And because they were able to save on the commute, they effectively had an extra full workday of productivity by the end of the week, which was really, really cool. And as you survey employees, 80% of employees believe that their employers can improve work-life balance by allowing remote work. And 89% are actually looking for more flexible work hours. In the early days of HubSpot's remote work, when we looked at people that were moving remote from being in office, actually those that moved remote on average saw a 10% increase in their productivity in the following year. So the data is actually really good, both in our internal data and the external, or the sort of studies that folks have done to understand whether remote work is effective or not. So you can rest assured that, like, if you do the right things, if you help support your teams, often they are working harder, not less. That's something that I talk about a lot with folks that are concerned about it. Is most of your remote people are going to sort of overwork and maybe at risk of burnout, not work. And so the question is, how do you shift your strategy? Like, we're in this world where we've all been sort of thrust into remote. It's happening at lightning speed. You may have no experience with it. It might be something that there's not a lot of enablement around. So how do we do it? So we'll start at setup. How can you structure your day? How can your individual contributors structure your day? One of the big things that I think about is this context switching. So for yourselves or for your employees, this is maybe very basic, but if you're in a work mode and a home mode, if you commute to an office, typically you wake up, you have your breakfast, you leave your home, you would take a train, you might ride your bike, you might take your car in, you have some sort of break point between your home and your office. And there's a period in between it where you can get your sort of mental game, your head on straight for the day, your thoughts prepared and ready for the day. So when you are working remote, you don't have that same commute period where you can get mentally prepared. And this is actually really important. If you are working in your home, you may not have a dedicated office. That's okay. You probably want to think about a dedicated location or dedicated space, even if it's just moving from your counter or your bed to a nook or a table. Have somewhere that is a workplace, and give yourself some time to prepare like you're going to the office. What a lot of people do when they first move remote is they immediately jump on the phone. They wake up, and I don't know how many of you have done this, but you wake up, you pull up your phone, you start answering emails, you hop out of bed, you don't follow any of your habits that you normally would going to the office. And what it does, it puts you in this defensive mode. You haven't had the time to prepare mentally. And you want to prepare like you're going to the office. You want to prepare, get up, get dressed, shower, dress like you're going to work. Take a little bit of space for that commute. Maybe you listen to a podcast for 20 minutes. If you can walk outside in your current location, like maybe you go for a short walk, but give yourself that space. The second thing that I would say is, I don't know how many of you have run into a situation where you've forgotten to eat lunch since you've been working remote. I know that I have, and it's something I have to be really intentional. So you want to block out this time for renewal. This is the idea that you're going to be working remote. It's really easy to get sucked into your seat. Give yourself a little space, build yourself blocks to have a coffee, actually stop working over lunch and make yourself lunch, and build out some regular one-on-ones with coworkers and chats. So if you don't know people well within your organization, if you're just not connecting as much with your teammates, one of the things that happens really naturally in an office is people tend to connect. You run into someone at the coffee machine, you go for lunch with teammates. You have to program all of that remote. And it's really easy to lose and then feel isolated and be on this island. So the purpose of these one-on-ones or these chats is not to just talk work. You want to meet up with your teammates. You want to meet up with your coworkers, especially people that you don't interact with as often, and have a coffee chat where you just sort of talk through things in your life or get to know them a little better. it can be really, really helpful to building connection, building network like you would in the office. All right, second piece here, structuring how you sell. So for yourselves, for your team, structure can be one of the first things to drop. So you want to think about 15 to 30 minutes at the beginning of every day to prep and plan your day. From there, having blocks for your prospecting and outreach, if you're in a net new sales role, admin, and then selling blocks. So without the energy and buzz of the office, it can be really hard to find motivation to prospect and to actually make sales calls. So setting up a predefined prospecting block can be a really powerful tool. You may suggest setting up some call blitzes where everybody calls at the same time. Even though you're not in the same physical location, you could have your team be a little competitive, friendly competition around making the most dials within a preset period. You might do something like pair up your teammates, have them hold each other accountable to their calls. We're all sort of in this together, and it's important that your teams know and understand that piece of it as well. All right. Last thought on admin before we go to the next slide. A lot of reps get mired in their inbox. They get stuck with doing the 80% of activities that don't help with their selling. So when reps first move to remote, blocking admin time can be really helpful. They put it all in an hour chunk of the day, and maybe that means they don't focus on follow-up emails or their inbox throughout the rest of the day, but it frees up that time to do these essential selling activities, run their product demos, or do their prospecting outreach. And the last thing I would just note is it's really important, back to this idea of context switching, really, really important to shut it off. You need to help your team shut off at the end of the day. Like, they need to be able to context switch and go back to their personal life. So if you just work all the way through, you're going to be in a space where you actually don't feel like you ever shut it off. It's really high risk of burnout, and that's something that's super important to be careful of. Cool. From performance management perspective, you want to have KPIs. So at HubSpot, when we manage a sales team, we want to have 2 new opportunities per day in the North America partner team. And it's something that's mutually agreed upon. We know the data says that those 2 opportunities will lead to success based on historical averages. So it's a very easy, very straightforward KPI. Another example might be touching 50 prospects per day. We can use a system like HubSpot CRM. You can use any CRM you like. But you need to have a system where you have mutual visibility into those KPIs. You agree on it with the team member, and you're focused on it. Managing 2 KPIs is maybe the most important activity of a manager in a remote world. It's doubly important to being in the office, where you can't hear them, you can't see them, you can't look over your shoulder and know that they're making dials. Second, touch base with your team members. You want to do daily check-ins with your newer folks, have a blocked set of office hours each week. So if you're a leader, put an hour or a 2-hour block once or twice a week where people can drop in. So you just run a Zoom like this and leave it open to your team. They can drop in with questions. You work through stuff and make yourself a little bit more accessible. One tactic that I really like for leaders is to build out a skill swap one-on-one. And what this is a time where your team members can catch up with each other, and you intentionally program it. So if I'm the sales leader, I might find that one of my sales representatives is really great at prospecting and one is really fantastic at running a product demo. I'm actually going to suggest the 2 of them link up. Usually they have different or complementary skills, and I'll have them pass that information back and forth. Lastly, from a course correcting perspective, you want to think through how to help your reps if they're behind. And in a lot of cases, it's either a buy-in or a skills challenge. So what I mean by that is, if they're not making their 50 prospecting touches, is it because they don't know how to find those 50 prospects and how to make those dials within the time period that's allotted? Or is it because they actually don't believe that that's the most important thing? So I think if you ask questions to understand where do they stand, it's going to help you ultimately determine if it's a buy-in or skills challenge, and then choose the right path. If it's a skills thing, have them bring up their screen, help them see or show you what they're doing, and you may actually find there's a space there. They're taking 15 minutes on a website to evaluate a prospect. You might be able to coach them, give them some advice that'll help them move a little bit faster. If it's a buy-in thing, then you want to help them think through, okay, what do you think is most important, and how do you think you're going to get to goal within this job if you don't do what we'd agreed upon as the most important activities, and really understand their perspective and how they're thinking about it. Lastly, I think that Gong is a really, really important tool. It's a call listening tool that lets you sort of review your team's calls, understand what they're saying and doing on the phone, and really powerful for HubSpot. We use it all day, every day to help coach and develop our reps. Next up is culture. One of the biggest challenges for remote folks is staying connected. So really easy to feel isolated right now, really easy to feel disconnected from your team. So as a leader, you want to think about how you're building that sense of connection for your sales team. At HubSpot, within a bunch of our sales divisions, we have a culture squad. They go by a variety of different names, but what this is it's a group of sales reps who's a volunteer team. They're dedicated entirely to making our culture better. It's rep governed. They get a set budget from leadership, and they have complete autonomy, with their mission being, how do you make the North America partner sales team more effective, better culture, more inclusive, more diverse? And I think you can start small with this. You don't need to build a whole culture squad and create a budget for it if you don't have it. What you can do is look for the person who's most passionate about the team connection and enable them to do some of this stuff. So you can nominate a small group of people to take on the mission of keep us more connected while we're working remote. Remote get-togethers are really helpful. So I think everybody's heard of Zoom fatigue, where people may be a little bit tired of getting on Zoom all the time. There is a sweet spot timing for this. You may not want to have a remote breakfast every single morning, but you could do something where you have once every couple of weeks a connection, or a weekly happy hour where the team can jump on Zoom and do things like get lunch or dinner delivered from a local restaurant. I like to remove work talk and have folks answer a fun question or an interesting question. So we're not talking about either COVID, or we're not talking about things in the workday. You're sort of shutting that piece of it off and just getting to know each other. So an example might be, what's the last song you listened to on Spotify? Or what's a significant event from your childhood? And the idea is you're getting people to open up and get to know each other a little bit better and be a little bit more vulnerable or open. Being present, you want to keep your cameras on. A lot of folks will jump on and by default, they turn that camera off. And it's instinct, right? Like no one likes to stare at themselves in the video. But it's really helpful to be able to see people. It's much more like you're in the room with each other if cameras aren't on. So at HubSpot, we use cameras at 100% of our meetings, including internal meetings. It's actually not something that we mandate or force, but for the most part, people will keep their cameras on. And if you can ask folks to a couple of times, you'll see that it starts to happen a little bit more naturally. And some of this comes from 60%-ish of communication is based off of body language and facial cues. So if you're just getting verbal, it contributes to that feeling of disconnection. So Zoom rooms are really helpful for teams that are focused on execution. So if you have a sales team where a good chunk of your work is not live on the phone, or just for other types of teams within the organization, a team Zoom room that is open at all times can be kind of a cool thing. And what that looks like is you have this Zoom room that's set up and open, and people can pop in and out. Lets you build a sense of connectedness via video. And if you're executing, you're writing up a statement of work or a proposal, you can kind of jump in and be working next to folks. It gives that office feel. One of the things we've been trying a lot with the North America partner team is this idea of creative team outings. So could be something like doing board games online. Our culture squad has done a bunch of different activities, from a trivia where each member sent in a fun fact or three about themselves. And the Culture Squad created a trivia game where you would guess which team member was the fact, and you'd have 3 or 4 team members that you would guess from. So it was a fun way to kind of get to know the team and some really wild and interesting facts. We've done Jeopardy. We've done a team Spotify playlist. We've done team workouts where folks can jump on and do a yoga class or a meditation. So some of this is dependent on the team. In the same way that you would build your team outings with a sales team in person, based on who the team is, what their interests are, there's a bunch of stuff that you can do remote. So you may have to do a little bit of digging to come up with ideas that are compelling and interesting to your team. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is build events that create that connection. Cool. The last piece that I hear from a lot of sales leaders is I'm concerned about over-the-shoulder moments. I'm ramping a new rep. I have someone new on my team that needs to get up to speed, and they need to be able to drop by their peer's desk, or I want to be able to sit at my desk and just listen to them on that sales call and understand what they're saying, what's happening, and talk through an issue in real time. So how do you overcome that when you don't have that access? They don't have that access. I think one of the biggest things that you can do is reframe for newer folks how you think about supporting them from a selling perspective. So in all of my one-on-ones, instead of looking for what there is to improve, I think everyone's had a manager that gave you 5 or 6 pieces of feedback and it was overwhelming. You didn't know which one to start with and you just sort of felt badly about yourself. For new folks, you actually want to find what are they doing really well that you want to keep doing. So I spend a lot of time looking at what's something awesome that they're doing that they can get recognized for. And Gong lets me do that when I listen to recorded calls. You can also record through Zoom and have folks share with you. And I look for those top moments. And if I find something really cool, I'll share it with the team. I'll share it with the group. I might even ask the team member, even if they're new, to bring it to a team meeting and share it and run a discussion around this tactic that they tried, because it lets us celebrate some wins. And it also gives them a bit more confidence for selling. One of the biggest hurdles is actually that confidence that you're going to be great at selling. So if I can help them to build that confidence by giving a bunch of positive reinforcement on the things that I like, it's going to be really, really helpful. I like peer sharing in team meetings as well, whether it's new folks or folks that have been on the team for a long time. 80% of my remote team meetings are conversations. So I'm not driving an agenda. If I come into a sales management meeting, I don't want to give 15 different updates. What I'd like to do is have a couple of we can talk through these issues. Everybody's participating and gets a feel for the problem at hand and gets to give some perspective, ask their questions. It's a lot of times sales reps will adopt what their peers say. So if a top performer shares something that I think is a great tactic, the fact that that top performer is sharing it is going to help the rest of the team adopt it way better than if I shared it, because they'll believe it from a top peer. So they'll probably deliver that position better than I would anyway, and it gets more people to do it. And lastly, I mentioned these sort of skill swap one-on-ones, but keeping that mental log or a written log of strengths and weaknesses of different folks on your team where they're really, really strong. And then as you hear it and find it, connecting those people together. This is doubly important in a remote world because you're intentionally building that connection as the sales leader and helping people to find time to connect with each other. Cool. So that's it for me. I'll be back on in a moment for Q&A. I'll pass things over to Andrei about how to get your remote sales team to hit their targets.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you, Brian. And well, let's get started right now. Perfect. So I think you've probably heard a lot here about how it is to work from home, and this is probably the situation in which we all are today. But there is something else to add to this specific period, and this makes this current setup quite unique in a way. And this other part of the equation somehow is the economic crisis in which we are. So today, that's the situation. We're all working from home and we have this economic crisis, making this moment quite unique and making the main objective of any sales team quite difficult today, which is hitting targets. And for most, and I say for most sales team, probably some of you might have seen this, this on social media. I mean, if you're not Zoom, basically, I know it's probably a challenge right now. It's the situation for everybody, HubSpot, Aircall, any company. The situation is tough, and we still basically need to hit target as the company is still expecting us to hit target as a sales team. So that's the situation. Now, one main advice would start here. When you have this in mind, and when you actually want, as a manager here, as a leader, to start explaining the situation to your team, to make sure that they are going to make their best to hit target. Because let's face it, it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder. We're going to be expecting more from people. They're going to be working from home, so it's all new. The crisis is also often, for most sales reps, is often something new. So one key exercise, I think, which is always useful to do, is to actually run through with your sales team what's in the head of your CFO today. If it's not the CFO, it's your current founders or whoever is running your company right now. And I think that this moment of transparency, this moment of sharing, this moment where you go into the situation, where you explain the situation of the company, the current costs involved, the where we're basically heading, just gives you a bit of relative, and it might also help your sales team today understand why the company is still expecting them to hit target despite all of this new situation. So let me start by something very classic here. When it comes to hitting targets, and I think if you're a sales rep or if you're in the sales world today, you always know that it comes down to prioritizing your time. So that's how I'm going to separate my different parts in this webinar, and I'll try and first talk about how you can actually try and not miss any of those few remaining revenue opportunities by being laser focused, and that might help you hitting target for April or even for May. If this is not possible, if you've already went through them, then we'll talk about how you can actually strengthen the relationships with your prospects despite the distance. So this is something that might actually help you achieve target or hit target in maybe end of Q2 or maybe end of Q3. And finally, if you still have some time left, depending on how your business is actually coping with the current crisis, well, how can you actually prepare for the future by reworking your current pipeline following a sales methodology? And if you take a step back here, and if you do this work method in a methodological way, this is what actually might help you hitting target at the end of 2020. So let's start going with the few remaining revenue opportunities that are there and that you should actually not let go. So this might sound slightly obvious, but this is where you must actually leverage your CRM all the more. This is where you can expect and spend time, if you're a leader or a manager, with your sales reps, digging into your CRM and find all of those opportunities which are currently open and which show extra sign of stuff that you can close, that shows that they can be closed, basically. I've always thought that in sales, you should always, as a sales rep, focus on the stuff that can close. But here, this is all the more the case, basically. And this is not only about looking at what's in your pipeline and what's the most on the right, basically, in closing confirmed or negotiating. It's looking at the other little details that you might be getting from if you have free trials, some activities, or those kind of stuff. Basically, you want to not let go any of those ops that are about to close. And if you're a manager or a leader, you want to spend the extra time helping your reps closing those ops. And to close up those ops, if there's one key advice I would give here, is you want to be prioritizing speed to close over total dollar value. What does this mean? It's basically, if you have the opportunity in this current context to get a commitment today or this week or in the next couple of days, even if the total amount that you're going to be closing them for might be lower than what you had previously expected, do it. Do it. You might have already run a new discount policy in your company, pushed by your CFO, maybe, but maybe not. And this is where you, as a manager, as a leader, with your rep, have a huge impact to happen here. What you want to prioritize is speed to close, and the total dollar value, that's okay. That will be for the future. If you try and keep the deals running for too long, you might actually never win any dollar. Another aspect of managing to close those final deals here across the line and in this period, which might be, let's say, maybe the peak of the crisis right now, is you want as much as possible to adapt your key selling points to the situation. Again, here, I think this is something that when you read it, it might sound slightly obvious, but as a sales rep, we often get quite comfortable in our comfort zone with our sales pitch, which has the different selling points that we got used to, because our product can help you on this, this, and this. And here you want to just take the time to actually say, hey, okay, that's the situation today. What's left in my product, which can really, really help our customers today? And this can change. I want to give you here an example for AirCall. So AirCall is a cloud-based phone system which integrates with the best CRMs on the market, of which HubSpot. And the fact that we're a cloud-based phone system was maybe the first argument that we actually pushed. So that was our key selling point. We were able, for some companies switching from working from their office, who weren't able to take calls remotely, to start taking calls remotely thanks to a cloud-based phone system. Great. But after a couple of days, that wasn't anymore the key selling point. We actually were now dealing with prospects which all were working with a cloud-based phone system. We're not the only cloud-based phone system on the market. So we had to look a step further. And here what we found by, again, talking to our prospect, talking to our customers, what we found was the most important, and what we had to stress as much as possible among our key selling points was, one, on the sales rep's point of view, the call quality, how reliable and strong the phone is when he's taking calls from home with maybe not as much of an optimal setup in terms of internet as is doing in the office. And from the management side, the whole analytics, monitoring, live monitoring of their calls. That's what people were missing with their current potentially cloud-based phone system. So that's the two arguments that we really pushed through over the next couple of days. And finally, I think this is where sometimes in those current situations, to hit those few remaining revenue opportunities, you want to sometimes be doing stuff that might not seem as scalable as what you would be doing in any different context. So here I would say applying as much discipline and responsibility to your tasks, which is something as obvious as what I call task could be like your own personal to-do. It's just a couple you only have. You can maybe even, as a sales rep, think of those 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 deals that you can really close in the next couple of days or weeks. And you want to be working them in a very smart and very detailed way. And that's the final, going back to tasks and maybe forgetting a little bit about what makes you work in a nice, scalable way in any other type of context. Now, if you've closed all of those revenue opportunities, good for you. And if you didn't have any, I'm sorry, but there's still stuff to do. And here, I would say what we've seen is, well, my second big point will be how you can actually use this moment to strengthen the relationships with your prospect despite the distance. And I'll start with 2 metrics which were shared by a company called SalesLoft. You've probably heard of them. And they showed among their customer database that they observed a 36% decrease in email reply rate. At the same time, they observed a 16% decrease in call connecting rate. So the difference between the two is huge. What it means is that basically today, in that context, people are more receptive to calls. And that's what your sales rep should be focusing on, calling their prospects and building the relationship. And that's actually what we also observed looking at our own sales reps. An interesting metric here is we looked at all calls that connected for more than 30 seconds. So calls that we consider having connected, calls where we consider that it's insightful. There's something happening here. And we saw a 25% increase of the average length of those calls. What it means basically, it means that prospects, customers are more open to talk. And if they're more open to talk, it means that you, as a sales rep, you're able to actually gather more information about themselves potentially, more information about maybe the company, more information about the current challenges that they're facing. You're basically able to gather the information that you will log in your CRM and that you will use later on. And you will refer to this touch point and all of the information that you were able to find and discover during this insightful call later on when needed. So that's a key observation that we found here. And then finally, related to calls, another interesting fact that we found is that the famous golden hours are changing. So here, it was hard to actually display it in actual data because golden hours are a thing that varies so much from one country to another, from one industry to another. But what we observed among our customer database is that the number of insightful calls, those calls which again last more than 30 seconds on average, have more or less spread across the day. And that means that basically you might have got used to actually making all of your calls at a specific set of day because you thought it was working for you, but now your prospects are now working from home, and this means in their whole life it's changed. Lots of change come with this, and you can actually connect with them at now different times of the day. We've seen a lot of calls around lunchtime, or maybe sometimes towards more the end of the day, arrive, whether it be incoming calls or actually sales are focusing their call sessions at this time of the day. Of course, I mean, and relating back to what Brian said about the working from home, you want to keep a certain balance. You want your reps to be always connected, always in front of their computer. But somehow stuff like having a mobile app and making sure that your mobile app receives your sales calls, the few incoming calls that you might be having back from a voicemail that you left earlier in the day, might allow you actually to still actually get those few deals in. And then basically, once you still have time, once you've called basically everybody that you managed to call, I know that not everybody will answer, that's life. You might still have time left. As a sales rep, as a manager, you might see your team still having time, and actually that's where it gets the most worrying. That's where you start feeling, hey, how am I going to hit target, and whereas my team actually has tried closing all the current remaining revenue opportunities, they've called everybody, what's left to do? Well, what's left to do is prepare for the future. This current situation is going to change. Things are going to come back progressively. Of course, we're all going to adapt. Maybe we're going to stay locked down for much longer, but the economy is going to progressively recover. So one thing, if you still have time at this point, which you could be worth spending a bit of time on, is actually reworking your current pipeline following a sales methodology. This is sometimes something people keep for really like a side project that they always put on the side. And my advice here would be, there are a lot of sales methodology on the market. And here I'm gonna talk about two very quickly. But the sales methodology, and especially in this specific time where you actually have a bit more time to spend on this kind of project, maybe, the sales methodology which will work the best for your company is your own sales methodology. I'm not saying it's easy to build. That's why I always say try and inspire yourself from some of the well-known existing sales methodologies. But in the end, a sales methodology has been built by somebody in a specific setup in a company, and somehow it felt like it made sense for a lot of companies, but that was what it was released. And in the end, if you do appropriate to yourself, then you will be able to adapt it and only pick what is actually relevant to you. So one of the sales methodology that we actually have inspired our own sales methodology from here at Oracle has been MEDDIC. So MEDDIC is one of the most famous one. If you're able to take all of your current open opportunities today and ask your sales reps to actually write each part of information where they know for each of their deals stuff related to metrics, what metrics are important for their prospects, who's the economic buyer, what about the decision process, what about the decision criteria, what about the identified pains, and who might be the champion in this company. And you realize that maybe some ops you still have a lot to uncover, and maybe you actually have all of the information for some of your opportunities, but just today is not the right moment. This month might not be the right moment. This quarter might not be the right moment. But having all of this laid down so clearly, this is what will actually accelerate potential close in the second part of the year. Another sales methodology, and here I'll just mention it more, I would say classic one, is bands. Just listing here budget, what's the budget here to close the deal, who has the authority, what's the need, what's the timeline. Timeline will actually be a tough one to find in this current context. But again, I would say, don't use MEDDIC, don't use BAND. Inspire yourself from those sales methodology to build your own sales methodology. And then once you have your own framework, apply it to your current pipeline. And finally, once you have done this, basically as a sales rep, but even as a manager towards your CFO, if you're a leader in the sales industry towards your CFO, you'll basically show that you own your pipeline, and somehow that will make yourself indispensable within the company. That will show that basically, even though you might not be able to hit this April target, you might not be able to hit this May target or this Q2 target, you still have a plan, you still have different bullets to actually reach this end of 2020 target. So that's all for me.